Welcome, everybody, to the last group of sessions for the 2021 GIS conference. It's hard to believe that 3 days have already flown by. My name is David Giordano. I'm the session moderator for this session. Unfortunately, Dr. Joseph Sloop and Dave Torn are not going to be able to join us live. However, they have pre-recorded their presentation because they were called away to the Forsyth County EOC related to the recent winter storm that we all experienced. If their schedule allows, they will join us in the chat box to answer any questions that you guys might have. If they're not there, you can always reach out to them and answer your questions. All of their contact info is on the mapforsyth.org website. The presentation is a full 30 minutes. It might go a little bit over. If you leave right at 1 o'clock to go to the closing session, I'm sure no one will be offended. But if you want to hang around and listen to the presentation in its entirety, that's perfectly fine as well. So without further ado, I will roll the presentation. Thanks for being here.
Good afternoon and welcome to our session, GIS for Cheap. Just a quick round of introductions. I'm Joseph Sloop. I'm the Geographic Information Officer for Map Forsyth. Just a quick background about Map Forsyth. We are a geographic information office. We do enterprise GIS. And so we work with pretty much all the municipalities in the county within Forsyth County. We have a unique role. We get to do a lot of the special projects, and we work with other GIS professionals in the county from areas such as tax, planning, and a whole host of other departments. Map Forsyth has been around for almost 10 years now, so still a relatively new department. And this session, we plan to talk a little bit about how we've been able to kind of go year to year on a lot of times very tight budget and still grow GIS within the county and the municipalities. And so here with me today is Dave Torn. And Dave, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Sounds good, Joe. You did a good job doing the background of Map Forsyth. But my name's Dave Torn. I'm a GIS project manager for Map Forsyth. I've been with the department since it started, like Joe said, about 10 years ago. I have been involved with GIS for over 20 years now, all at the local government level. I worked at the city of Roanoke for a little while, and the city of Winston and their IT departments before coming over to Map Forsyth. But Map Forsyth does GIS services, supports for Forsyth County. We do City of Winston, most of the surrounding municipalities and towns, like Joe said. We do all the addressing for most of the municipalities. We do a lot of GIS web applications, a lot of ArcGIS online stuff. We do data updates, public requests, and special projects. And thank you guys for coming.
Thank you, Dave. And one key point Dave mentioned here is, we're over the GIS infrastructure. So we're the ones constantly looking at, okay, does this product fit with our business plan? Is this something that department A, B, or C could use to improve workflow and those kinds of things? All right, okay. So if your budget looks like the one on the left with Scrooge McDuck, this is probably not the session for you. You probably have all the licensing you could ever want and all the staffing you would ever want. However, for the rest of us that are on poor Donald Duck, that's kind of how we feel sometimes with our budgets. And so, like we've kind of alluded to, obviously, GIS can become very expensive very quickly with the ever-changing landscape. And so I'm going to let Dave talk just a second about that, because the reason I have him here presenting with me, he is our GIS project manager. So he gets brought into every project that we do and talk about with GIS servers, licensing, and those kinds of things. Dave?
Yeah, no problem. Like Joe said, GIS can get expensive, and it can get expensive quick. Um, we're primarily an Esri shop, about 99% an Esri shop. We'll talk about the exceptions a little bit later. But anybody that uses Esri in any capacity knows, they're always coming out with new things. There's ever increasing server requirements every couple of years. We've started migrating to Pro and say, oh, our desktops and our laptops just won't hack it anymore. And on top of that, licensing. If you want to grow your GIS, both on the front end and the back end, you constantly need more licenses. Unfortunately, we're not in a position to afford an ELA where we have just licenses all over the place. So we really have to be careful and really justify everything that we buy. So, like Joe was saying, I mean, we really have to, and we'll talk about this more, but we just can't afford everything we want. If we went by Esri's best practices, would have a server for this, a server for every little piece, and backup servers and development servers, staging servers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so we've really had to tone it down and kind of get realistic with things. And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit. And hopefully it'll help you guys as well.
So, like Dave was saying, here again, just like every other GIS department, we want to be on that bleeding, cutting edge of technology. Esri is an amazing group, and we're not knocking them in any way. We have two of the greatest reps that any department or organization could ever want. In fact, they've worked with us numerous times and countless hours to help us kind of fit the right size for our GIS, and then also strategically find ways to help us grow. Because quite honestly, it's hard to predict the future. Just a few budgets ago, it was like, hey, anything you want in this budget, ask for it. You're more than likely going to get it. Before the COVID pandemic, we were looking at one of those budgets, and then all of a sudden, the COVID pandemic hit, and we weren't sure of sales tax revenue and even just real estate tax revenue. And then it became, oh, now you need to cut your training budget 50%, and oh, you need to cut your total budget by 3%. And so it can become very difficult. And that's where, here again, you have to have a really good relationship with your Esri reps, because like Dave was saying, just like everybody else here, we are 99% an Esri shop. We have some other stuff sprinkled in there. So I'm just going to share a story with everybody. I'd only been the GIO a couple years, and at the time we had a different Esri rep, a great guy. And we were working with him, and of course, we all want the enterprise license agreement. And so we worked together on that for a few months, coming up with the different specs, and okay, now how are we going to sell this thing? How can we justify? How can we show the ROI? All those kinds of things. I mean, we put a lot of hours into it. So time came, we had this, we set up this meeting, us being a city county department. I had the county manager, I had the city of Winston manager, deputy assistant managers, a lot of other key individuals in this meeting. Myself, I think Dave was there. And our Esri rep did an amazing presentation, absolutely amazing. And, I was like, okay, I'm sitting back, I'm like, okay, we're going to get this thing. We're going to get it. And, always, cost comes up, those kinds of things. But the question that nailed me, and I should have thought about it, but I did not think about it at the time, was county manager just asked very simply, with our current environment, what percent of the capacity are we at in terms of using it? I had no answer. So you can imagine, therefore, we did not get an ELA, and today we still actually do not have an ELA. So it brought me to really think about, only ask if you really need it. But then the key piece is then be able to prove that you need it. And so that's kind of what we've been doing over these next few years, is really strategically working with management, working with budget and things like that, and showing that we need it. A great example of this is, just like everybody else, we've been doing a lot of stuff with ArcGIS Online, which obviously we run a lot of stuff on-prem, and use in-house servers and those kinds of things. And we knew we were getting close to capacity. And we had been talking with a few people, management and IT and some other folks, and hey, we really probably should stand up another server. This one is getting pretty full, and it's going to max out at some point. So finally, we decided to blow up the server.
So how do we prove it, Joe?
So
I think that's the next slide.
Yeah, so we
And I could talk on this one a little bit.
Yeah, so we literally just blew up the server. And Dave, I'll let you talk a little bit about the repercussions of that.
Yes, yeah. So this was a nightmare at the time, but it goes back to the last slide. Be able to prove it, and I think we proved it without a shadow of a doubt after this incident. Reappraisal was coming around for the tax administration department, and they approached us, wanted a fairly robust field app and ArcGIS Online to be built out, where their appraisers, their assessors could go out and go to property by property and enter different data, et cetera, et cetera. And they had to reference a lot of stuff that was back in the office. So it needed real-time field editing. We had multiple feature classes coming from a couple different SDE databases. Some of those were then dynamically joined to tabular data in the tax system. So this thing was pretty robust. And we're like, well, it might be a little bit slow, but it can probably handle it. So we tested it out in the office, worked great, but then sent all the assessors out in the field, and it just basically blew our server up. I mean, the app itself wouldn't work at all, one, but then two, and the biggest repercussion is, we only have the one ArcGIS server, so all of our public facing web applications are, all the services are on that server. So our tax parcel viewer, our planning application, these primary sites that we're responsible for that get thousands of hits a day, just just stopped, and everybody was getting timeout errors. So we got a lot of calls on that, and that got a lot of attention very quickly. We worked with our MIS department, who was great, and we just looked at that server, and not to get too much in the weeds, but we pulled up Task Manager, and there's ArcSoc processes, just hundreds and hundreds, and the RAM was at 99 to 100%. There really wasn't anything we could do. So that was a good lesson learned. And it did prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that we did need something else, and we did catch some flack for it, because all our main and web applications went down, and not only was tax affected, but the public was affected, and a lot of other departments, both at the city and the county, rely on some of those applications to do their day-to-day work. So with that, we proved we were at our limit, and it kind of put a break on things too, because we got to the point where we were getting pretty good at talking to a department, say, hey, you want to, an ArcGIS Online web app just as a viewer, or do you want to collect a little data? You want to do a collector? And so we're getting really good at turning those things around, and it was kind of our specialty. And we just kind of had to put a stop to that because we realized that we were at our capacity. So that kind of put the brakes on things for a while. We needed something different.
And just so you know, if you're planning to do something like that, just be prepared for the repercussion. I actually took a hit on my performance review for that, but I wore it as a badge of honor. Quite honestly, it was worth it to get things moving forward. So from that too, we learned a lot about, here again, needs versus wants, and I'm gonna let Dave talk a little more about the needs versus want piece.
Yeah, needs versus wants. I mean, you could want everything in the world, but it goes back to the Scrooge and the duck slide we had back there. So you got to really look at what you need with the limited resources you have. I mean, if we got everything we wanted, we'd have a fully built out GIS infrastructure on the back end. It would have all their best practices in place. Would have an ELA and all the licenses, and our MIS department would have no problems spinning up all the servers we needed to keep things moving, and would have portal and enterprise and all the latest and greatest stuff out there. But if you looked at what we needed based on what Joe and I have been talking about, really all we needed was the ability and the capacity to keep spinning up these web applications and to fulfill people's and departments' requests when they come in and ask us to do something. So yes, we might want all these things, but what do we need? We needed the ability to publish more services and not blow our servers up at the end of the day. So that's what we needed. Um, and I think we can go on to the next slide there, but let Joe talk a little bit about our goals.
Yeah, so kind of separating needs from wants also ties right into what Dave and I felt like was aligned geospatial goals with organizational goals. I think most cities and counties and organizations will have some sort of overarching goals. Sometimes they update them, or they like to do new ones pretty often. But what we have found is the key thing is in order for us to really justify and work with our county and cities is to tie what we are doing with GIS into the larger picture. And how can GIS support those individuals, organizations to achieve those organizational goals? So Forsyth County has one of theirs is to manage all systems effectively. Very broad, very open, but I like it because we can come in and Dave and I can sit and say, or anybody from my department say, hey, if we implement collector or survey 123, here's the workflow and this is how it be, and the data on the back end is this and that, and see how much time it improves and things. I know just over the years, I've spent many hours researching and attending conferences and other things about ROI and GIS. I know sometimes it's tough, it's not very straightforward, but I found that this is a great way of really proving, hey, you know what, GIS is here, and it ties in literally with everything we do as an organization. And so one of our internal goals for Map for Scythe is that every department use some sort of geospatial technology in some capacity, whether they are an active user of Art Pro or desktop or even QGIS or a web application we've rolled out. It doesn't matter. We want them using that because we know that that kind of technology and the data flow and the data accuracy will help them make better data-driven decisions. And here again, if we're hitting those organizational goals, everyone is happy. And then again, you have to make sure that you're letting people know that GIS is helping with those organizational goals. You can't be passive about it. You don't need to be arrogant either, but you also need to let people know, hey, look how GIS improved this workflow or improved this decision-making process. Okay.
So this is just a little tip and trick about how to save a little bit of money and maybe reallocate some resources. I mean, this is a little self-explanatory, to be honest, but it is worth mentioning, especially in the fast-moving world of GIS and Esri technology. Their licensing models do change from time to time. Specifically, the one we noticed recently was that they previously had in their ArcGIS Online user accounts, they had two tiers. They had a lower tier and a higher tier. And we bought a bunch of licenses back in the day, and they all needed to be higher tier because they had to do editing and they were doing collector stuff, and we were keeping track of who was doing what, et cetera, and some other functionality that the lower tier just didn't have. But here over the last year or two, they've split those two tiers of licenses into three tiers. Okay. And so that changes things a little bit, and on top of that, what your organization needs as far as GIS might change a little bit too. So not only is Esri's side of things changing, but also your organizations change a little bit as well. So it is a good idea to review things. Um, you know, for as an example, we are trying to set up a load balancing infrastructure on our back end. We're not going to go too much into that, but that is one of the things and solutions that we're trying to increase our capabilities. It's something that we need, something we want to, but it is something we need, and it's the most cost-effective way I think we can get to our goals of increasing our capacity and keeping our customers happy, et cetera, et cetera. But to do that, we need some money for some servers. So we took a good hard look at our Esri renewal quote this year, and realized that all those those old tier 2 AGOL licenses, they were actually had gotten converted to tier 3, the creator level. And looking back and say, well, why did we need tier 2? You know, the functionality that we needed was actually in that middle tier that Esri had now, the editor licenses. So we were able to save quite a good chunk of money by telling Esri, hey, let's drop all these creators back to editor levels. And, you know, a couple other little things too. You know, we had an Esri developer license, an extra one of those that we weren't utilizing. A couple of extensions, we had a couple too many copies. If we really looked at it, it's like, well, we don't really need 3 copies of this. We can get away with 1 or 2. So it is a worthwhile exercise. Don't just get that invoice and then just send it on and get it paid. Really look and see what's changed and see where you might be able to reallocate some of those things because it's really worthwhile.
So, like Dave was talking about, we review our licensing every year. And part of that is we keep track of our users. And it's very interesting. If you go back 8-10 years and look, I mean, we had a ton more desktop. Now we're moving in the direction of having more and more AGOL type license. And so it's just a natural progression that truly does follow the technology. And so one of the few ways we track return on investment is how many licenses we have, right, versus number of folks using the GIS technology we have. Now, we get that we can't count, so we have some public applications like Tax Parcel Viewer and a planning application that's open and used by all citizens, attorneys and all kinds of people that, we can go back in, how many hits per day and those kinds of things. And lots of times we'll do that. But for the most part, we try to just really track the internal. Everybody knows that, I mean, here again, those external applications we can show very quickly. Yes, they're being used. And like Dave and I both spoke earlier, you bring down the server and you will start getting a lot of phone calls and you'll realize how many folks use those applications. Other ways of return on investment is we do a report. I do a yearly report talking about the work that we've done, just highlighting and showing the different types of work. And so in this, I think some of us, I'm going to jump to the next slide, are very familiar with this GIS return on investment pyramid. And so what we do is we go through, we track, we don't have a work order system. We actually just use a spreadsheet to track all of our work. And then what I do is I kind of take that and I just break it all down and put it into these different categories of data creation, data management, spatial analysis, workflow, integration, organizational problem solving, and focus on organizational goals. And as you can see, this pyramid and everything speaks for itself. So I couldn't make the nice pyramid in Excel or anything. So I just made kind of a boring little chart that mimics the exact same kind of information. And this is put into that yearly report. And I do the report not on a fiscal year, but an actual calendar year. That way we can use the information that I'm reporting on and talking about for upcoming budgets. And here again, you can see, the data creation things, but the real key is those, what I focus on is, we talk about all the different little projects and really highlight some key things, because the whole idea is I want to report back, hey, yes, this is what we're doing. We're doing some really cool stuff, but at the same time, I really want certain departments and certain projects to really shine and get people jazzed up about working with GIS, working with us. So I always definitely talk about the projects that were under the organizational goals and how those tied back into the larger picture. And we were able to, here again, that helps every budget year. If I say, hey, we want to do project XYZ, and here's how it ties in with our goals, here's how it ties in with the county goals, here's how we can show return on investment. Now, we don't do that with every little project. There's some just day-to-day stuff that we do. But here again, for example, we take care of address information. We can still show that this many address points were created. They were created in these different jurisdictions. And you can then extract a lot of information about what's going on in different locations based on just number of new residential addresses added and things like that. So you really just, and I'm happy to talk with folks offline about some of the different things we do. Dave knows he and I have created numerous spreadsheets and all kinds of charts and stuff. Here again, just trying to kind of, I guess, perfect the way we do it. And really, it's kind of, in my opinion, there's no real one size fits all. You just got to kind of know your audience. And my audience really likes um, kind of stuff that is like, by me showing ROI based on, I guess you could say it researched or something that has been published. People really like that. That's one reason I gravitated to this ROI triangle, because people really in our organizations will be like, oh wow, you tied it into that. We really like that, and it gives it a little more teeth. So every place is a little different. But if you ever have questions or need to bounce some ideas off, Dave and I are always available to talk about that. And quite honestly, I could speak hours on ROI in and of itself.
He can. I've heard him do it. This one is just thinking outside the box, and this is something else you can do. And there's a lot of different open source softwares and other solutions besides Esri. We found Esri's still the big elephant in the room. It solves all of our needs. They do a great job, but sometimes we just can't afford everything we need to get. We have to look in other ways, or like I said, think outside the box. For example, when we reached capacity on our servers, we started looking around and realized that on ArcGIS Online, we have quite a few credits. And, those credits do have an expiration date, and we did the math and said, well, we're not going to use quite all those credits. And so the first thing we did, since at the time we couldn't get any new servers or software or anything like that, is some of the guys in our department looked at our biggest web applications like Tax Parcel Viewer and Planning App and some of the others and said, most of the hits on these are coming from these big layers. These big layers like address points and parcels and center lines and a couple others. We update most of those on a weekly basis anyway. We did the math. We figured, we were going to have enough credits to do this. So we put those up on AGOL and actually hosted them. So that took, and this, I'm not to say it was a band-aid, but more of a short-term solution rather than a long-term solution. But we put those layers on AGOL, reconfigured our web applications, and, our servers were fine. We knew we were still pretty much at capacity, but we weren't worried about necessarily blowing things up again as long as we didn't put any big applications out there. And that's worked great. We have scripts that update those things, once a week, and it's been working out good for us. We might utilize more of that down the road. Who knows? But that's one way we said, well, instead of doing it this way, let's think of other ways we can do it. The other thing that comes to mind is that one of our bigger customers in the county is the tax department. And some of the guys down there, some of the employees do have to run this process sometimes called present use. And previously it was an Esri tool, an Esri custom tool we created. But we realized looking and talking to these people that's really all that they were using GIS on their desktop for was to run this tool, once a week or once every couple of weeks. So instead of, spending the money to do Esri licenses and put desktop on all these PCs, we created the same tool in QGIS. And since QGIS is free, we put it on these couple machines, and these weren't big Esri users anyway. They didn't complain that they weren't getting, ArcGIS, but we showed them how to use this present use tool in QGIS, and everyone was happy. And we saved quite a bit of money on desktop licenses by doing that.
Yeah, and I just want to point out too, as Dave's pointed out, is we have a lot of stuff up here, and a lot of it. The nice thing is a lot of it will work with one another. Nancy Ross from Mecklenburg County just rolled out the county's performance metrics using ArcGIS Hub, and within those sites are all the Power BI reports that their folks use. So here again, when we say think outside the box, we're saying, don't just be tied down to one product or another, but a lot of these integrate. Esri has made great strides to integrate with with Jupyter Notebooks, can handle back-end stuff from PostgreSQL. QGIS can handle Esri stuff. I mean, it's amazing all the different ways you can kind of line up different things. So here again, just sit back and say, okay, what do we need? And then what products will help us get there. And I always tell our staff, you know, hey, we do GIS. We don't necessarily do any product. Now, there's products we use more than others, but at the end of the day, we do GIS, and that's how we look at the world and how we figure out problems. And so, what tool do we need to do to get there? And then we know you got to have some patience.
You do. Anyone that works in local government can most likely relate to this. Change takes time, and sometimes, especially in government, you just need to work with what you have for the time being, until the next fiscal year or budget cycle, or until whoever needs convincing is convinced, or until you blow your servers up, or whatever. You know, sometimes who knows. So patience is definitely a virtue. Just be patient and hang in there. The other thing is building relationships with departments. You know, we have a great working relationship with our MIS department, for example, and that's gone a long way. Instead of just, you know, demanding this, demanding that, you know, we've actually taken the time and kind of cross-trained some of those guys on some GIS type things on the server, and so that goes a long way. Just like I say, have patience with people. A lot of people might use GIS but don't really understand GIS, especially in MIS. Who don't have, you know, specifically in our case, you know, they don't have GIS people in their department. We're the GIS people, and then we have to work with them and kind of explain to them how things go. So yeah, just be patient and build those relationships, and hopefully good things will happen.
Yeah, and I agree 110% with Dave. Our CTO and I are very good friends, and we've developed this relationship over the years. And I'll go to IT conferences with him, and I'll pay for him to go to GIS conferences with me, and we sit on boards and talk about things together. I mean, so very important to build those relationships, and that stuff just doesn't come, you know, overnight. You got to invest in it. So very much patience you must have. So the final thoughts here. I know we're pretty much about out of time, but these are our takeaways, right? This is our one slide that you can take away and take back and hopefully do something. So here again, ask if you need, but be able to prove your needs. Have your list of needs versus wants. It's okay to have wants, because you might have that budget year where it's like, put in whatever you want because you're going to get it. Well, you better be ready if they say that. The other is, you know, prioritize your organizational goals and align it with those organizational goals. Always review your GIS license every year, and not just your Esri, but everything. Review everything that you're doing. Is there a way we can do it better? Is there a more efficient way of doing it? Not necessarily all the time. I hate to say it, kind of goes against our title, but not sometimes it's not the cheapest, but maybe it is the more efficient way of doing it. So you need to do that. Return on investment. You know what? I think sometimes as GIS professionals, we don't do a good enough job of bragging on ourselves and our employees. So always be thinking about that. Think outside the box. Don't be afraid. You do GIS. There's a lot of really cool software out there, different things you can use. And then again, like Dave and I just touched on, be patient. We've been working on a master address repository program for over 8 years now, and it's well worth it. We're getting ready to finally go into the phase 3, which is fine, but we got to have patience with that. So we had to pre-record this due to all the crazy weather that we've been having, and so obviously we can't take questions. But if you do have questions, here is our link to our website where all of our contact information is. Dave and I are always happy to talk to anyone with questions or thoughts or whatever. You can get all of our information at mapforsyth.org. And we appreciated the opportunity and the time we had today to talk with you and share just a little bit about what we've learned over the past 10 years about building out GIS, and honestly, we'll continue to refine that. So thank you for being in this session today.
Yeah, thank you all. Thanks for listening.
I think that's going to wrap it up. Once we're a little bit after 1 o'clock, so if you guys want to go on over to the closing session, I'm sure we'll see you there. Thank you for attending.